Okay, today what I'd like to go over is setting up one of the Calvary video projects. So to begin, I'm just going to jump open to Premiere. Go ahead and click on New Project, and I'll just call it Demo. This is just the name of your project, and the location is where you want this project file to be located. Good idea to know where you're throwing this file. So for my case, I already had a folder that I had created, and I'll throw that into Calvary Demo. Hit select folder. Okay, it's in there now. So from here, let's go ahead and just hit OK. We don't really need to change anything yet. To begin with, start off with kind of a blank canvas everywhere. First thing I'd like to do is import a piece of footage. So I'm just going to go down to File, Import, and let's just drag one of the raw files, one of the original interview files from the last sharing lives. So it doesn't really matter which one. I'm just going to hit OK and import one. First thing to note before you start a project is what type of footage you're dealing with. Right now my view is set so I can see list details, and it shows me a few things that are kind of important when you're playing with footage. You might have a view that looks like this, where it has like a thumbnail. But for my case, when we're first starting, I want to make sure that I know what type of footage I'm dealing with, so I like to see the details. One thing I like to look at is the frame rate. So it's 23.976, and the video is a 4K file. It's 3840 by 2160. The reason why the resolution is important is because that allows me, if I have a really big file with high resolution, I can crop in to get like separate shots, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. I'll go ahead and go back to the thumbnail view just because it's a little bit easier sometimes for people to read. But as soon as I grab this file, I'm just going to throw it onto my timeline. And one thing I do want to mention, when you do throw a piece of piece of footage onto your timeline, what it typically does is just set that timeline to the exact dimensions of your footage. And sometimes that's fine, but in our case, a lot of times I don't want that. And the reason why I don't want that, and I'll just go back to my list view for a second. You can see I had my original video file and I have my sequence here, and this is your timeline of where you're going to be editing everything, and it made a new item. I'm going to call this one timeline, timeline demo. You can name it whatever you want, but that's just basically where I'm going to be editing everything. But you can see it took the frame rate from our original footage, which is great, and it took the video resolution, which usually is okay, but really what we want to do is we want to have this video file inside of a smaller canvas. We want it into a 1920 by 1080 canvas, because that allows us to frame our shots differently. We can have a medium close-up, a little bit wider shot, and all within a 1920 by 1080 frame, because that's usually what we're outputting to is HD, which is just 1920 by 1080. It'd be nice if we had like a second camera getting 4K close-ups, but what we do to kind of cheat to get different camera angles so we can edit is actually just punch in on the shot to make that work. So what I'm going to do right now is, I have the timeline demo highlighted. I'm going to go to sequence settings, and you can see it's that 4K resolution. It's 3840 by 2160, and again that's 4K. To make that HD, I'm going to go to 1920 by 1080. And I don't know if you saw before, probably not, but it was originally a 16 by 9 aspect ratio. I'm still keeping it 16 by 9 by putting it 1920 by 1080. So all we've done is really just shrunk the canvas. And you'll see now everything is kind of zoomed in close. And if I click on my video file, and by the way, the video track is right here for V1, and all these A's are for the audio tracks. If I click on the video track, You can see some effects if you have the effects controls tab highlighted, and right here you can see you can kind of bounce between different tabs, but I want the effects controls, and all of a sudden I don't see what I saw a moment ago because I need to click back on my clip. It wants to know what parameters it wants to show when you're in this view. But one thing I'm looking at is 100%. So I can tell that if I wanted, I could at 100% resolution without losing any quality within this 1920 by 1080 canvas, I could get this close to my subject matter. That's probably a little closer than what we'll want to be dealing with. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom out. And really, I just know off the top of my head, it's 50%. 1920 by 1080 is 50% of 3840 by 2160. And another number one can memorize is 960 by 540. That's exactly half of 1920 by 1080, and that's just going to perfectly align everything in the center. So what we've got here now is a 1920 by 1080 canvas that we can deal with, but if needed, I can go to like this razor tool. I can maybe make a cut here. So say for example they messed up on their lines for whatever reason, and I just hit V. V is the shortcut to go back to your arrow key if you don't want to be cutting things. But say I needed to edit something out, move it back over, and if I just had a cut from back to back, there'd be like a little jump. It's called like a jump cut, and it won't look right. So usually you want to kind of change the camera scale to kind of mimic like if you're having a second camera. Usually if you can change it close to 25% or more, that's a good starting point. If you don't change the scale much, again, it will look a little awkward to pop between different scalings. But as a general rule, yeah, 25% change, and it'll be a drastic enough change that it makes sense as to why you're cutting on an image. But anyways, there's a little bit of room for flexibility. It kind of depends on what the framing is of the shot that you have to work with. But here, again, this is just to kind of give you an idea as to why we make a 1920 by 1080 canvas. Hopefully that makes sense, because that's again how we're outputting to a lot of the social media sites, and it also gives you the flexibility to change the resolution. And again, that's the 75% there. Line everything up, and if it wasn't obvious, here's your x-axis and here's your y-axis for moving it left and right, up and down. You can just kind of click and drag to get the composition that you would want in a shot. So that's kind of the basics behind getting that set up. I probably want to make another video on linking media, because that's the next thing that isn't really probably known too often, but it's pretty important when you're setting up your project, media management in general. So I'll go ahead and quit this recording and I'll make another one.